I now call on Sarah Boyack, 9 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And first of all, I'd like to welcome Stuart Stevenson to his new role and back to the front bench in government, to look forward to working with him. And I'd also like to welcome Alex Ferguson to the Rural Environment and Climate Change brief. How the next 5 years pans out will be all about how the Scottish Government uses its leadership. And the message from SNP ministers for the last couple of weeks has been that ministerial doors are open to us to present our ideas for the government to act on, and I very much welcome that offer. The Labour manifesto for the election was full of practical ideas, and we will pursue those ideas through the Parliament's committees and in our debates. And on all the big issues, on our climate, how we deal with waste, how we address sustainable flood management, how we protect our natural environment and at the same time make the most of our environmental capital, and how we protect our rural communities from the impact of both SNP and Tory budget cuts. On all of these challenges, Labour will be arguing for fairness and environmental justice. In the last Parliament, we were critical of the SNP's financial changes to the funding regime for flood investment, and only last week in my own region, SEPA's flood map showed thousands of houses and businesses are still at risk from being flooded. In the Lothians alone, over 13,000 homes and almost 1,300 businesses are still at risk, with damage estimated at £115 million. We've also supported the SNP's zero waste ambitions, but we remain very critical of the lack of financial support to bring those ambitions about. And across Scotland, there are proposals for incinerators which local people are deeply concerned about. But the SNP government does not have a coherent policy framework to make the right decisions, so there are challenges. In the last Parliament, we stopped the SNP ministers from privatising our forests, so we will scrutinise. With respect, Minister, it was your colleague Rosanna Cunningham that withdrew from that proposal, and at the time we congratulated her. We will scrutinise them. I'm afraid it's just a matter of record, Minister, that you wanted to privatise over 25% of the Scottish Forestry Commission's estate. You just need to look at your own proposals from the last government. We will scrutinise the implementation. It's a matter of public record, Minister. We will scrutinise the implementation of the SNP's election promise to plant 100 million. On that specific point, I'd be delighted.
Stuart Stevenson.
Give me a single specific quote where we ever used the word privatisation.
Sarah Boyack.
The government's proposal, as outlined by Michael Russell, the then Environment Minister, was to lease out to the private sector for over 75 years at least 25% of the Scottish Forestry Commission estate. I think we all remember the debate at that time across this chamber. Let's just move on from that. You didn't, because we stopped you. Let's just move on from that pain. We will scrutinise the implementation of the SNP's election promise, however, to plant 100 million trees by the year 2015. We will also scrutinise the implementation of the Marine Act and the network of MPAs, and we need a proper scientific basis for protecting our marine environment and a regional approach which is both sensitive to fishery stocks and to local fishing interests in terms of jobs. And we will look forward to engaging in the reform of the Common Fisheries Policy. In the last session, we persuaded the SNP government to retain the Agricultural Wages Board, so important to incomes for rural families. And we also argued for more transparency on how the Rural Development Programme is implemented, and also for animal welfare and biodiversity concerns to be at the heart of management policies. In this Scottish Parliament, we would also like to see more practical support for crofting and for community ownership. And the reform of CAP and the Rural Development Programme, as the Minister has suggested, will require effective leadership, because there will be difficult decisions to be taken, and we all need to be involved in those conversations. On the Labour benches, we will continue to support initiatives to promote Scottish food and drink, and I welcome today's announcement. But the Scottish Government must do much, much more to support local food procurement. We believe that targets are now needed to develop more local supply chains if we are going to secure local supplies to our schools, our hospitals and local services. As food prices rocket, many people are now struggling to make ends meet. And that is why we also need to see community gardens and allotments to meet public demand. So I would like to know what priority the Scottish Government attaches to its own election commitments to enabling public sector organisations to provide both access to land and support for new opportunities for people to grow their own locally. And will legislation be required? We believe the Scottish Government, as it faces the next 5 years, needs to be radical. We suggested the Commission on Rural Scotland to take evidence from across communities in Scotland to look at the action that the Scottish Government should take to improve people's lives. We need investment now in rural services and jobs to make sure that rural communities don't lose out disproportionately from cuts, whether it's from an SNP or a Tory government. And rural development has got to be more than about agriculture and forestry, crucial though both those industries are to our communities. It's also got to be about economic development, tourism and house building, whether it's private or social. We also need progress on superfast broadband, and will the Scottish Government set a timescale for the rollout of superfast broadband in today's debate? It's essential to the success of rural businesses. In the last Parliament, the Ministers asserted that our climate change targets would blaze a trail for the rest of the country. So can we have a report today on the progress that's being made in meeting those targets? I'd like to give the Minister the opportunity to reaffirm your commitment to meeting the 42% target, because very little actual progress was made in the whole of the last session of Parliament. We have a golden opportunity this time to use those 5 years collectively across the chamber to put in the radical policies that are needed. As we celebrate our Climate Change Act 2 years on, we need to celebrate achievement and we need to get going now. And it's the responsibility of the Scottish Government to set the right policy framework. We engaged constructively in the debates and included many suggestions in that Act from Labour on targets, the land use strategy and the need to address energy conservation as well as energy and heat generation. We backed a strong public duty, backed by public procurement, to enable the public sector to take a lead and to make the ambitions in the Act a reality. In our manifesto, we made a commitment and a suggestion on infrastructure, starting with our cities for electric vehicles. And I would ask the Cabinet Secretary to say whether he will commit the Scottish Government's own fleet to electric and low-carbon vehicles to lead by example. We also want to see more action on energy efficiency, and again it will need leadership. Will the Scottish Government match us or even go further on our ambition of 10,000 public sector and social houses receiving benefits from the feed-in tariff and the renewable heat incentive? We said 10,000 houses by 2015. Will you match us or go further? The other area where the Scottish Government can go further is in the carbon-efficient use of our land. That's why we argued for the production of the land use strategy. And will the Minister today tell us when the implementation action plan will be published? Again, if we are to see the planting of the Scottish Government's target of 100 million trees over the next 4 years and peatlands restoration, we need a coordinated approach, and we must seize opportunities for strategic green infrastructure. As the SWT comment, much more needs to be done if we are going to see habitat restoration and the creation of a national ecological network with a much more proactive approach to biodiversity. We need radical politics and we need radical action. The Central Scotland Green Network and the John Muir Way, for example, have the potential both to improve people's quality of life but also create new jobs and tourism opportunities. But if it's going to be successful, then we need work in partnership between the Scottish Government and local authorities. Studies have shown that thousands of jobs could be created as we move to a low-carbon economy, but those jobs have got to be spread across both our urban and our rural communities, and for that we need the right planning framework, the commitment to green procurement and the investment in sustainable infrastructure. So, Cabinet Secretary, we agree that the next 5 years represent a fantastic opportunity, but only if we have the practical policies in place to deliver on that ambition. Our radical climate change targets can only be met in Scotland if we make that transition to a green economy and if we use all the powers of the Scottish Parliament now in putting those ambitions in place. On the Labour benches, we will argue for fairness and environmental justice as the right principles to underpin that ambition. And I give you the commitment today, we will be constructive, we will add our policies to that agenda, and we will scrutinise the work of this government over the next 5 years. The ambitions are right, but the ambition will only be achieved if we work together and get the practical policies in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much.